In the last course, we briefly touched on basic styling. There is another manual that I have developed called Illusion, which is actually a manual that I wrote in lockdown. I've actually won awards for this manual because it simplifies styling, because styling can be difficult. And although it makes sense to go straight on to that advanced styling now, it is a lot for the brain. So we're going to finish going through this pre-made including classic training manual, and then the Illusion manual is actually a separate manual. So I am going to go over that at the end just because it can be a lot. So for now, we are going to move on to our lash adhesive and how our lash adhesive works. The lash adhesive we use, so again, I don't read from the manual, I'm kind of just explaining, but feel free to kind of read as we're going along. But lash adhesive is a really, really strong chemical, and it's really important that we understand how it works. I mean, for years and years, I had no idea. I did a fairly basic course, and now I know it actually really is fascinating, and it makes me much more cautious when I am using adhesive. One of the main questions you'll see that gets asked in the industry is, what is the best glue? I mean, there isn't a best glue. Most adhesives, glue, adhesive, you'll hear it called different things. Most adhesives contain the same ingredients. The main ingredients in our adhesive is cyanacrylate, and cyanacrylate is the ingredient that bonds two surfaces together. Adhesive will work better or worse depending on your room conditions, depending on how you lash, depending on if you're quick, if you're slow, depending on the weather, if it's hot, if it's cold, depending on the humidity, if there's lots of moisture in the air or not, because cyanacrylate needs moisture to cure. So there isn't really a best glue. You just need to find what works for you, the speed you work at, and the conditions that you work in. So just to go over ingredients briefly. So the ingredients in our lash glue, cyanacrylate, which I mentioned, is the bonding ingredient, and that makes up around 95% of our lash glue. We then have stabilizers, and that makes up around 4%. And what the stabilizers keep the glue, I need to decide whether I'm going to call it adhesive or glue, keep the adhesive in a liquid form. So you've got the cyanacrylate, which is the bonding ingredient, the stabilizers, which keeps the adhesive in a liquid form. And then we have something called black carbon, which makes up the rest, so around 1%. And the black carbon is effectively a pigment, and that gives the adhesive its color. Without stabilizers, the adhesive would become solid. And the way that it works is we have, let's say, this is my eyelash extension. This is my natural lash. We have got our tweezers, and we pick up our extension and we dip our extension into our adhesive, which needs moisture to cure. So as soon as we take that extension out of that glue and place it onto the natural lash, the outside layers of that glue start to cure. You place it onto the lash, and then it just starts to cure around that natural lash. One, from the moisture in the air, and two, from the moisture in the natural lash. And that's effectively how it works. And as that adhesive is curing, those stabilizers are being released, which turns that adhesive bond from a liquid into a solid. Hopefully that makes sense. Usually I'd have a diagram for this. What I am going to do is create a diagram and put it under this video so it'll make a little bit more sense. Humidity, temperature, shock curing. We do need to make sure the temperature and the humidity are right in our room for our adhesive to work. Sometimes we need to adjust the temperature. Sometimes we need to adjust the humidity. Depending on the adhesive you're using, it will have on the box the best temperature to have your room and the best humidity levels to have your room. You can buy something called a hygrometer. You can get them off eBay, Amazon for a couple of pounds. I would say have one just so you can use it as a bit of a guide. You know, if your glue isn't working, why isn't it working? Okay, my humidity levels are too high or they're too low. How am I going to fix this? Shock curing. Shock curing happens when the adhesive is exposed to too much moisture. So although cyanacrylate needs moisture to cure, what happens when we place the eyelash extension onto the natural and then it's exposed to that tiny bit of moisture, those vapors are released, which are the stabilizers, which turns it from a liquid into a solid. But when it is drawn to too much moisture, so let's say, for example, we are placing an eyelash extension on the end of the natural lash and the eyes water, and there's too much moisture, those stabilizers that are being released to turn that liquid into a solid, they get stuck because there's too much moisture. And if you looked under a microscope, that little frosting, those stabilizers being released, they're actually white. Imagine super glue. If you leave the lid off, it's white. It's the same thing. So sometimes you might get a little bit of shock curing, which is where the adhesive has cured too quickly and you see little white areas on the lashes. That is what causes shock curing. So if you do have a client that has watery eyes, get a little bit of kitchen roll or a little cotton bud and just make sure that tear is dry before you carry on lashing. Post-washing. Back in the day, we were taught when it comes to eyelash extensions, do not get your lashes wet for 24 hours. And a lot of people still believe that you cannot get your lashes wet for 24 hours because it's going to affect the retention of your lashes. Now there is so much more research out there, so much more research in the industry. We know that you can get those lashes wet quite quickly. So we mentioned shock curing a second ago. Let's say we have placed the extension onto the natural lash. Within a few seconds, imagine the bond as an onion. It's got layers and layers and layers and it cures from the outside in. Within a few seconds, let's say 10% of those outside layers of that lash bond have cured. If there is too much moisture around that area, you will get shock curing, so it can affect retention. Within 1 to 2 minutes of that placement, for example, let's say 30-40% of the outside layers of that teeny weeny glue adhesive bond have cured, it's unlikely it's going to cause shock curing or affect retention. And within, let's say, an hour, it's said that that little bond, even though it's that teeny amount of glue, is fully cured. So actually within 2 to 3 minutes, you can get the lashes wet without causing shock curing and without it affecting retention. So what we can actually do is cleanse. We can do a post-wash once we've finished a set. And what this does is it cleanses the lashes. It shows the client they're not going to lose their lashes if they wash the lashes. And it reduces sensitivities and allergies because actually allergic reactions from eyelash extensions can be caused from those stabilizers and those vapors being released and sitting around the eyes. So as long as there's been a few minutes between you finishing that set and post-washing, we absolutely can post-wash, and I would absolutely encourage post-washing for clients. Shelf life of our adhesive. Generally, adhesive will have a shelf life of 6 to 12 months if unopened in the box. But again, the box will tell you that. Once your adhesive is open, I mean, when you start training, ideally, you're not going to want to get through your adhesive in a month, which is what, we would do if we were lashing day in, day out. When you first start, you want to kind of stretch it out a little bit because you don't want your expenses to be too high. So I'd say you probably could get around 6 weeks out of that adhesive. For us personally, we change our adhesive every month. So on the first of every month, we just change our adhesive. So we always know that our adhesive is at its best. The stabilizers in the adhesive do keep it in a liquid form. The more we use it, the more the adhesive is exposed to the moisture in the air, and the less those stabilizers will do its job. So over time, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 weeks, if you start using the adhesive and it's a little bit stringy, then you know it is no good. The viscosity, so the thickness of the adhesive, should literally be like a watery consistency. And then lastly, just on this subject, health and safety. As I have mentioned, and I will continue to mention, cyanacrylate, the main ingredient in the adhesive, it is drawn to moisture, which is how we can stick the eyelash extensions onto our natural eyelashes. I mean, you'll realize when you do your practical element, we will practice on a doll's head. So we're using synthetic strip lashes with synthetic extensions, and it's much harder to place because we don't have that moisture. So when we are lashing, the adhesive is drawn to our airways, our nostrils, our eyes, our mouth, and over time it can affect our health. So I would recommend, if you can get into the habit of wearing a mask in the early days of your lash career, it will benefit you in the long term. We've put a little bit in here in the manual about using disposable N95 masks. So they're going to be better than your, typical NHS masks to protect yourself. It's rare that it happens, especially if you're not lashing all the time. But if you are lashing day in, day out, you are exposed to those fumes. Sometimes it can make you nasally and it can absolutely give you a sore throat. So that explains a little bit about what adhesive is. I hope that makes sense. As with any of this theory, if you ever have any questions or any of it doesn't make sense, write it down and just give us a call, drop us a message, and we will help as much as we can.